In this tutorial, I'm going to use an example of actually building a e-IDViz model using the components that have been discussed previously in the previous tutorials. Now, design projects, before you begin actually building an e-IDViz model, they really need to have clear design expectations, and the goals need to be clearly understood. So I'm making the assumption here that you've gone through the analysis process, the proper analysis and diagnostic procedures to understand what you're designing is actually well informed. And so before you begin actually modeling these, you really need to conduct the analysis and to get that better understanding of the learning environment. Now, this could include how it's going to be delivered, or it could be the actual learning outcomes that need to be addressed in terms of the modeling. Now, in this example, we're actually going to use the example of kite flying, or flying a kite, to actually model something. And so to begin this, we actually want to go back up here and rename our canvas. So I'm going to call this kite flying. I'm going to apply that. Notice that now my name for the canvas has been updated. And to get started, I'm going to drag over an LXU to begin. And so I'm going to name this LXU assembling a kite. And you just double click on those. I've named that. Now here in the context, I'm going to actually set the context of this lesson within a city park. And context is very important because you need to know where this learning is actually occurring. All learning occurs within some level of context. Now the challenge is going to be to assemble a kite to fly, a kite that will fly. Okay, so we included that, and then the activity is going to be assembling the kite, which they sound related, but really this is the activity that they're going to be doing, that the learner will actually be doing. So, and just complete that, and we're going to say given in a kit. So it gives a little bit of constraints of how that activity is being used. Now you notice here that at this moment I can select this and drag it around the design canvas. So it's very flexible in terms of what we want to do with it. So we've completed some of the basic information about the learning experience unit. Now we're actually within the learning experience unit. We're ready to actually include the building blocks for our particular lesson. So in order to do this, I'm going to drag some over. I'm going to have a resource, and I'm going to drag over another resource here. And one of these I'm going to call a manual. And the other I'm going to call a video tutorial. And both of these, in terms of the access method, I'm going to have them available online. And you can also define if you want to say, is this online asynchronous or online synchronous? I'm going to go ahead and call that online asynchronous on both of these. So notice I can just kind of jump around there and copy that text in there. So I have two resources. Now I want to actually include some dialogue about that resource. So I'm going to drag that in. And notice I'm not doing any sort of connections yet. And this is going to be a discussion on where you're going to fly your kite. Okay, so I've included that in there, and again we're going to make this asynchronous or online asynchronous here. So we could just copy that text and move it on over. This is a flexible framework. The idea there is to really provide the description that you need. Then we're going to add some practice into this. So the practice is going to be, let's say, a online learning object for kite assembly. We'll just call that a kite assembly lesson, and once again we're going to choose that as online asynchronous. And then we're going to have one other practice here where they'll actually assemble a kite. So notice what I'm doing here is actually building out how I want my lesson or my learning experience to operate. And so I can drag those around. Now, the thing that I'm going to actually have out of that practice, the second one here, is an actual artifact. So that's going to be, the artifact is an assembled kite. And you'll notice that the building blocks that are included here can really be used to describe a very wide array of learning opportunities and learning experiences. They're designed to explain the greatest possible experiences with the fewest possible components, and that's what we have here with just 5 simple components. Simple building blocks. And so the last 2 things I'm actually going to include in here are 2 feedback building blocks. And these are going to be maybe comments on the accuracy of the design. So did you assemble the kite properly? I'm actually going to move this over here. And then the second is going to be test flight. So did it actually fly? And this will be the practice in terms of the access method on this practice is going to be in person. As we really will call all these in person for this particular example. If you could do something where maybe you offer some comments online in terms of feedback, but we're just going to say that these are all in-person experiences. And so you notice that in this case it's actually a blended learning example as well, because we're bridging between online asynchronous and synchronous in-person activities. Now, you notice that these building blocks here can be moved around, and so what I'm going to do is actually kind of organize some of these out so that they're easy to work with. Now, this resources here, I want to kind of explain how this container operates. I'm going to drag a container over here, and notice I can resize it. So this container, and you can actually move it on the field back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and send that backwards. Actually, we'll just send that to the back for our purposes there. And so what we have here is grouping these particular resources together. And I'm going to send And so what we want to do here is really begin to build out our particular lesson, our learning experience unit. Now, when we're ready to actually connect these, we'll use a connector. And so here in this example, I'm just going to connect this dialog to the practice. Now, these are, you'll see, the connector has dual arrows, and so what I want to actually have done is just to begin an arrow that points to practice. So we don't want it necessarily to be a two-way arrow, because once we're done with the dialogue, then we're going to go to practice. Whereas on these resources, we may want to have them done independently, and so which indicates why there's really not a connection between those. Or we could also connect between the container and dialogue. Now, so I also want to show kind of once in this other example where we go from practice, we'll go to the artifact here, and once again we'll have a directional arrow that once we're done with the practice, that leads to the artifact. And then, but in this case, we could also say that maybe there is some kind of exchange in the ideas where I have a two-way arrow between the artifact and the feedback. And so in that case, we can designate that by the two-way arrow use. So once you have kind of your LXU organized, you have your lesson kind of designed, you can select all these items by simply clicking and dragging over the top, and then group the entire LXU. And so what this does is this associates all elements within that, and now you can drag the entire thing around and connect it. The reason why this is important is because you've essentially developed one learning experience unit there, but you can also use within the canvas to go and develop another. So you can build the template out for another there. And if you need to kind of zoom out a little bit, you can do that within the interface. But you can also connect learning experience units to learning experience units. So here we're going to just select that arrow, and then we'll make it directional. There we go. So now we have our assembling a kite learning experience unit going into a new one that we've just created. Now, once you're done, you can actually resize the canvas at any point, or as you're working, you can resize the canvas by right-clicking and then go to resize, and that will fit the screen. Or you can go into properties and actually select a custom size for the canvas, and that will help you to begin to add new elements onto the design canvas as needed. So in this tutorial, I walked through an example related to flying a kite of building out an actual learning experience unit. So you're modeling the learning experience using the e-IDViz framework. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate the process of modifying an e-IDViz model as you're using it within the design process. Now, e-IDViz is really best used as a dynamic blueprint for the high-level decisions that you need to make when organizing a course or a learning experience unit of some type. Now, when creating and modifying these models, you can also use project documentation templates to help include notes and things. So this might be something that you would want to include as you modify the template throughout the design process. So I'm going to zoom in here, and you'll notice in the e-IDViz template framework, there's a number of things here. So we can actually drag a note box over for requirements. There's design patterns, performance outputs, and then general project information. And so consider these as informational elements, not necessarily related to the model itself, but more supporting the model and how it would be implemented. So you could include things like we know the project has to do these items 1, 2, and 3. Or your design pattern might be we know it has to be a blended learning framework or something like that. So you're able to include these within these project documentation items. Now, so these can be simply just dragged from the e-IDViz framework onto the design canvas and moved around. And just like the building blocks, they can be double selected and edited there within the design canvas. Now, if you need to actually modify a learning experience unit as you're going through the design process, you recall that they can be grouped. So if we select that, it's all moved together. Now, if we want to actually modify something specific in here, so let's say, for example, that we want to modify the placement of dialogue, for example, we can right-click and then select Ungroup. And in that case, we can then move, let's say, hypothetically, the practice before the dialogue, and we can move these around there. So really, anything can be modified there as we go forward. Now, we can also delete items, so we select and delete, and then we can also select the connectors as well. So if we wanted to remove some of that, we could bring in a new dialog component and rearrange those, redescribe it. It really is a pretty flexible framework. And then when we're ready to, when we're done, so we can move these around. Let's say that we just wanted to remove that. So when we're done, then we can select again the entire range within the learning experience unit, and then go ahead and group those back together. And then now the entire learning experience unit will move together. Now, to share an e-IDViz model, because that really is the purpose for this, is to be able to share it, you'll notice that we have a much larger design canvas than what we're using. So I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so you can kind of see. So we're really only using this quadrant here. So in order to prepare this document for sharing, you can go here into right-click Resize Canvas, and you can say Fit Content with Padding. Now padding will give you a little bit of area around the sides, so I'm going to say 25 and select OK. And now you'll notice that if I zoom out again, all my elements are contained within, are neatly contained within that sized design canvas. Now, if you want to actually share your design model, you can actually go to the export out as a PNG. So here I'm just going to say kite flying. A PNG is just a graphics file. And then by doing that, that actually saves the PNG to your computer where you located it, and that way will allow you to add markup or be able to email that to your design collaborators. And so with e-IDViz, it really is a flexible framework that you can go in and edit, modify, and then share your new ideas out. And this alone gives an immense amount of data in terms of how the learning experience unit is to be designed and the relationships that exist within these building blocks for that. So being able to go back and modify these models is really a critical and very beneficial aspect of using e-IDViz. So in this tutorial we've talked about the process for modifying and sharing e-IDViz models throughout the design process.